So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Charles Alder. I'm the one of the two co-founders of EcoForce Global. I'm going to take you through a very strict 30-minute presentation this morning about the EcoForce Global opportunity for farmers and answer a few questions for you. At the end, if we've got time, I'll unmute everybody and we can have a quick session, but we will be done and dusted within the 30 minutes. So who is EcoForce Global? This is my wife and I, Tracy. We founded EcoForce Global in 2020 as a business after spending 7 years supporting farmers through drought, fire and floods across Australia. We saw an opportunity to utilise landowners and farmers in terms of being part of the climate repair process. And so we are on a mission to capture as much CO2 from our atmosphere through trees and plants, repair our soil. We know that this is going to take a long time to do. We probably won't finish it by the time we expire ourselves, but we are really looking to develop a worldwide platform within which people can affect change and support farmers and agriculture in the process. So, some background, as I said, Tracy and I built Rural Aid from scratch back in 2013 to 2020 when we had raised over $100 million to support drought, fire and flood affected farmers across Australia. At that time, we had over 14,000 farmers who had requested assistance from us. One of the many challenges we were told when we started the charity was that very few farmers would trust anybody with their financial or their mental health situations. We found that to be quite the contrary, actually. Once they actually understood that you were interested and supportive and listening to them, they would actually open up to you. So we provided a substantial amount of assistance. We were the only charity that provided fodder assistance to the farmers in northwest Queensland who were flooded. We had sole responsibility with the Queensland and the federal governments to provide that support. We also were heavily involved in some bushfire stuff, but predominantly our expertise was through the drought times when our fundraising campaign called Buy a Bale was responsible for the vast majority of that $100 million which our charity raised. And that program had a very impactful but also understandable message, and that was to consumers, if you wanted to support farmers, the best thing you could do was to buy a bale. It was very instructional, it was very direct, and subsequently they saw us carrying hay all over Australia, lots of photos, thousands of farmers appreciative, and it became a very strong message, which many people in Australia will know of, the Buy a Bale fundraising campaign to support farmers. So we supported farmers across all different categories, and we got to meet farmers who were croppers, cotton growers, sheep, cattle, dairy, you name it, all across the spectrum. And it was also during that time that we actually funded a number of case studies through the charity or the not-for-profit group called Soils for Life, which exposed us and shared with us the benefits of soil repair in terms of the overall farming viability, but also in terms of planetary repair. So the challenge for the charitable sector in terms of the agriculture sector is that the scale of the problem in agriculture is so huge that it's impossible to be able to provide long-term viable support unless we actually assist farmers to modify or change their farming methods to make them more sustainable. So sustainable is about the word, it's sustainable about being a charity, sustainable about being in terms of being able to provide ongoing support. And the problem is that we just can't shift enough hay or water or provide enough financial assistance when you're in the charitable sector. And $100 million is a pittance compared to the size of the overall agricultural sector. So we actually walked away from our time at Rural Aid and thought there has to be a way that we can actually engage farmers in terms of land repair, soil repair, carbon sequestration, but how can we also engage consumers and give them a way that they feel as if they are empowered to be part of the solution, but not actually have to radically change their way of life, because most of us don't want to change much, particularly when it comes to climate. It seems to be an issue that's just so big for everybody. How can they be involved? How can they understand, et cetera, et cetera? So what we've got today is our solution to that problem. So our solution is that we need to plant billions of trees. Consumers understand trees. Everybody understands the value of a tree. And these are just some of the benefits which all of you who are on board today in terms of farmers and the ag sector would understand these benefits and values. But consumers, importantly, also understand these values. Now, we're aware that there are farmers who have strategically cleared parts of their land, and that's increased the productive capacity, and there's absolutely no issues with that. But around the world, we are actually cutting down and destroying far more vegetation and habitat and trees included in that than we are actually replacing. So each year, we're actually emitting more carbon into our atmosphere, but we actually have to find ways of drawing that down. And as we cut down more trees, we provide less opportunity for that carbon to be sequestered naturally without science being involved into our trees and into our soil. So our solution is that we want people to buy trees. Now, been around the farming sector, as I said, for 8 to 10 years. These are just some of the challenges that we face, and not necessarily just in Australia, but in other parts of the world. You know, deforestation is happening in Africa, it's happening in South America. You know, carbon is a major factor of global warming, whether we like it or not. The amount of carbon in our atmosphere and carbon in our oceans is causing acidification in our oceans, but it's also causing the environment and rainfalls to dramatically change on land. So we've got to try and deal with these issues as best we can, understanding that we don't want to restrict primary producers' ability to generate an income, but we have to look at how we can actually make our farming lands more sustainable. So how big is the opportunity? How many trees do we need to plant? Well, depending upon who you talk to, it's you know, people like Sir David Attenborough, it could be 3 billion. Other people talk about 8 billion. It really doesn't matter. You just have to look at the current weather conditions that we've faced over the last 3 to 4 months. The massive fires in North America, USA, Canada, Siberia. The bushfires are still burning in Siberia, and the government over there has decided that they won't even bother trying to put them out. And we've had the bushfires that we've had in Australia, and so it goes on and on. So in terms of planting a lot of trees, we've actually got a huge job. But in difference to other not-for-profit and community organisations who simply want consumers or want corporates to buy trees, and you give us $1 million, we're going to plant 1 million trees, we're actually looking to create a multiplier effect of these 1 million trees. And we'll just use 1 million trees as an example for today's presentation. If we just plant 1 million trees and we don't actually help those trees to get through to a point of maturity, we may well face a 50% failure rate of those trees to grow. And again, depending upon the environment, where they're placed, if they just literally dig a hole, stick a tree in the ground and move on, we know that there's a significant proportion of those trees actually fail. I was speaking with a gentleman just recently who was part of Visy, and when he was working at Visy, they invested, I think it was near on $1 million in planting trees. And at the end of the first year, they were advised that I think it was somewhere between 80 and 90% of those trees had died. So they weren't very impressed with the fact that they'd spent $1 million planting 1 million trees, and they lost 800,000 or 900,000 of them. So when EcoForce Global plants trees, we actually want the trees to live. So we're partnering with farmers who've actually got access to 50% of the world's landmass to help those farmers look after the trees. But we also want farmers around the world to adopt the regenerative ag processes and principles in their farming business. Regen Ag, for those of you who haven't been exposed to it yet, is a far more profitable, far more sustainable, far more nature-based form of agriculture than is spraying chemicals to grow wheat and crops, et cetera, et cetera. So there's more about regenerative ag, and we can talk more about that in the future, but we want to help farmers adopt the regenerative ag processes, which companies like McCain, for example, have now stipulated that they only want to buy potatoes from regenerative ag farmers. We've got General Mills in the United States now that only buys flour from farmers who don't use chemicals in terms of their processes. So these principles about organic or regenerative ag-grown product are becoming now part of food manufacturers or the food processors stories as well. So there's great value in having farmers adopt these processes which are far more sustainable. We also want to work with not-for-profit groups and tree planters or tree professionals if we actually need them, if we can't work with our farmers to actually plant the trees. And importantly, the types of trees that we plant are the trees that actually suit the environment. So we're not importing species of trees into an area where they've never been before. In terms of choosing the trees that we plant, we look obviously at the provenance. We also look at the climate, and we also look at the farmer's needs in terms of whether the trees are to be planted along fence lines or in the middle of crops. We also take some soil measurements of the property, and we look at the soil types. And we do all this consultation before we actually plant our first tree, because we want to maximise the growth opportunity of these trees and supporting farmers. So we're motoring along quite nicely here. If any of you do have any questions that you want to pop into the chat on the way through, I'm more than happy to pencil those in for a quick Q&A at the end. Hopefully I see a few of you have dropped something into the chat there, so that's great. If you've got any questions or want to privately ask me a question, you can do that as well. So now I want to take you to what is effectively our proposal to work with landholders and farmers around the world. So farmers come to EcoForce, and we've now got farmers, I think, in about 14 different countries, who say to us, we want to plant some trees, we want to adopt regen ag principles, we're interested in the process. Where do we go to from here? So once a farmer's actually registered with us, we then connect with the farmer, and we then ask them a range of questions: soil type, native tree species. We talk to them about the availability of seeds from their own property. And we also we talk to local seed producers or tree nurseries within the area, who may also be able to supply us with the trees that we actually need to plant on our property. And we actually agree with the farmer about how many trees they actually want to plant on their property. Now, somewhere between 25 and 27% of land is the ideal rating for tree or foliage cover on land. So we don't want to go past that point, because we don't want to deter economic capacity. Anything less than that, and that gives us an opportunity to actually plant more trees. It's not so much just about the trees, but the principle here is that we want to be able to support regenerative ag. The next step is that we actually draw up what's called a regen action plan. And this is a 2-year costed pathway to take your property from its current position, whether it might be chemical farming or industrial farming, through to regenerative ag. And in that regeneration action plan, we actually come to an agreement on what you actually need to do to move forward. Now, there are a range of different training providers, for example, in Australia, who will teach farmers how to become a regen farmer. So there's a range of training courses, but there's also infrastructure that's required on many properties to actually make that farm a regen farm, in terms of smaller paddock sizes, additional fencing, and other such costs. And many of those costs are actually born out of an understanding of regen ag and what the actual course providers will actually advise you that you actually need to do. But that becomes the funding model, or the funding plan that we have in terms of our funding back to the farmers who adopt the process. So included in the plan is an agreement where we will actually reimburse you, the landholders, $4 per tree planted per year against the cost of actually looking after the tree. And we'll go through a bit of a scenario this shortly, so you'll see how the numbers fit out. But instead of us just giving farmers money which may be used for equipment that is actually not going to help the regen ag process, we actually structure in the RAP plan what it is we actually will reimburse you for in terms of expenses that you've utilised in terms of moving across to a regen farmer. And the farmer signs off on the number of trees. EcoForce then goes and advises the nursery or the seeder of the numbers of trees that we need, and we set a date as to when the trees are actually going to be planted. We agree to pay the farmer the $4 per year, 2 by $2 instalments throughout the year. And those instalments are sent to the farmers to cover expenses that were already agreed in their RAP, and they're paid 6 monthly. Each 6 months, when we actually plant a tree on your property, it's covered in a tree guard, which you'll see shortly, but effectively, every 6 months, we want to go back to the consumers or corporates who have bought a tree through our Buy a Tree campaign in the same way the Buy a Bale campaign was structured. We want to go back to those consumers or corporates and say, here is the tree, it's in the ground, this is a photograph of it, this is the QR code and the GPS coordinates of the tree, thank you for supporting the environment, and here is your tree, and it's actually doing something. So it's fundamentally important that we actually provide transparency to corporates and consumers that this partnership that EcoForce has with them and with our farmers is actually working. We don't want to be another organisation that says, give us $1 million, we'll plant 1 million trees. And when we actually get that report in from the farmer, that's when we distribute the instalment payments. We then, obviously, as one of the options we have is to actually fund local not-for-profit community organisations to actually plant the trees. Now, it may well be that the farmers actually want to plant the trees and we'll pay the farmer $3 a tree, plant the tree, or we'll actually pay a not-for-profit group, and groups like Landcare and others who struggle for funding for their own environmental projects. We're working with them to say, listen, if you want to plant the 10,000 trees on Fred's property, we'll pay you the $30,000. We know that at the moment you're writing grants to get that money. So therefore, if you plant the trees for us on a commercial basis, it's probably better for you to get the money from us than it is to write a grant and hopefully be successful, but in more cases not. So we want to contract a local not-for-profit. Trees are ordered from the available source, and prior to planting, EcoForce will actually, we have a partnership with an arrangement with a company here in Queensland who will come and actually measure your soil carbon levels prior to tree planting, and they'll also do that at the end of the second year, which is part of the partnership. Any questions, please drop them in. We'll keep on firing. So here's what one of our tree guards looks like, and here's the app that we actually have that farmers will be using to actually scan the QR code, take the photograph of the tree, and set the GPS coordinates of that tree. And that, for us, is part of the transparency. And farmers do this 6 monthly. We are looking at technologies that you could do this possibly by drone, but really, I think more often than not, it's going to be a matter of walk around or even pay someone to walk around, because if you've got 10,000 trees and we're paying you $20,000 every 6 months to provide us with a report, you may well be able to pay someone $1,000 or $2,000 to go walkabouts for a few days and do all the scanning for you. Once you've taken all the photographs and you upload that data to us, that's when we then make the reimbursement against the Regen Action Plan in terms of what you've already spent money on, whether it be training, whether that be fencing, et cetera, et cetera. If the tree dies within the 2-year period, EcoForce will replace it, and we'll just ask the farmer to replant it. Tree actually is the property of yours. As soon as it's planted on your property, the tree becomes your asset. Any benefits that you can accrue out of that in terms of carbon is another discussion for another day, but certainly the tree becomes yours once it's actually on your property. We've covered the point about reimbursement, and at the end of the 2 years, EcoForce will have made 4 payments to you, the landholders, and the final soil carbon measurement reading will be taken. Okay, so here's a very basic model. It's a very basic program. There's no rocket science attached to it. Trees are sourced at commercial rates from nurseries, so we actually are paying people to supply us with the trees. We pay planting organisations to plant the trees. We provide the tree guards, we provide the stakes where applicable. We provide the QR and the app to actually do the tracking. And we actually pay the farmers or support the farmers through the reimbursement as part of their RAP plan. So if you're a farmer and you were to take 5,000 trees from EcoForce, that would see you earning $20,000 a year or $40,000 over 2 years. And obviously we just do the multiplication, 10,000 trees, 40,000 a year, 80,000 over 2 years. Can you actually have multiple tree plantings, every 2 year period after each other? Yes, you can. And there's a range of other questions that we've got. So effectively, the trees are gifted to you by consumers and corporates who buy the tree through the EcoForce Global website, through our Buy a Tree marketing campaign, which is going to corporates, which is with consumers and people are buying trees on a regular basis from all around the world. The tree is maintained by the farmer. The tree dies, we replace it, but the forfeiture of the $2 per tree per 6 months is obviously lost because the tree has died. Trees are chosen based upon the native status. There are some countries where fruit or edible trees are native to the environment, and we will discuss with farmers in those countries to actually plant those trees so that they have the multiplier effect of obviously generating income for the farmers, but also supporting the other costs, the community, etc. There's no cost for any farmer to be involved with this EcoForce Global program. We simply want to work with farmers who provide us with the landscape for us to be able to plant the trees, and then work with those farmers to become regen ag farmers. And the really big opportunity here is that if we can move farmers to capturing more carbon in their soil than they would ever capture through trees, but consumers understand trees. Consumers don't necessarily understand carbon sequestration, and they also don't necessarily want to invest in a farmer's property, but they will invest in trees for the environment. Carbon credits are not included at all in this equation. Although we do a soil carbon measurement at the start and at the end of the 2 years, our partnership arrangement as it stands today is where you, the farmer, have an arrangement with this independent monitoring company, and you structure a relationship with them. The company we're using is currently having their standards certified in the United States with the US Department of Ag and the EU. And their carbon credit measurement device was actually developed by the Department of Ag and Auburn University in the United States. And we expect that inside the next 6 months, their standard for a carbon credit will be recognised on trade exchanges, so Chicago, New York, London, etc. So that's when it comes to carbon credits. So separate conversation, we can have some of that with you, but you can certainly get more information from our partner in relation to that. So I'm just going to finish up with a few FAQs. These FAQs are available on the EcoForce Global website. If you go to ecoforceglobal.com, the menu, the right-hand side of the menu actually has all the relationships or all the elements that relate to farmers. There is a minimum number of trees, 2,500. What sorts of trees do we plant? They're natives. Will EcoForce support my farming business? Absolutely. We understand the value of farmers. We understand the challenges that Australian farmers have particularly, and we know that those challenges are not just unique to Australia. We are in regular conversation with farmers in Africa and the United States, Canada, South America, and the challenges that Australian farmers are facing is really no different to any other part of the world. You don't have to have an understanding of regenerative ag. The process here is that you can adopt the principles of regenerative ag and be trained on the way through and learn what you need to know so that you are taught from some of the best. And we have some fantastic exponents of regen and holistic grazing and farming practices in Australia. So great processes. It's a 2-year partnership. The trees are prioritised on a first come, first served basis. There is some variation to that based upon seasonality and availability of seeds. We know that in some parts of the United States at the moment, seed access is very low in some of the areas where there have been some substantial bushfires. And we have a few seed banks in Australia, but there aren't necessarily seed banks in other parts of the world that would require the volume of trees that we need, but we are working with them to increase those. Loss of a tree, EcoForce replaces it. Who's responsible for watering the trees? The landholder. Does it have to be a new planted tree? Yes, it does. we work on the basis that in Australia, the federal government basically took from farmers existing landscapes and existing tree volumes and put them into the Paris climate obligation that the Australian government signed up to. So we are looking at new trees, new foliage as part of our process. Every one of the trees in Australia will be QR coded. Those QR code reports are sent, as I said, back to consumers who've actually purchased the tree or the corporates. And some of these corporates are big companies, major supermarket chains. Those sorts of companies are looking at this program to be able to prove the veracity of what we're actually doing for the environment, how much carbon we're actually capturing through trees and through soil. And the big opportunity is in soil, and that's why it's so important that regenerative ag is a big part of our tree planting partnership principle. We just don't want to plant trees, we actually want to have a multiplier effect. And consumers are buying trees from EcoForce Global to then give to farmers. So the processes are working quite nicely. So that's the end of the presentation. I know we've come to 26 minutes, which is pretty good. If anybody does have any questions, please, if you want to pop them in, I can answer them for you. I can send you a copy of this PowerPoint presentation to each of those who registered for this morning's session. And my email address here is on the bottom of the screen, but my email address and my phone number are available for you if you have any questions afterwards. If there's anybody have any questions, if you want to pop it into the chat session, that would be great. Otherwise, I think we are all done and dusted for our 30-minute speed dating session from EcoForce Global.